This is Alan from Primordial, and you are listening to the Brutally Delicious podcast.
One, two, three, four. The Brutally Delicious podcast. The Brutally Delicious podcast. The Brutally Delicious podcast. The Brutally Delicious podcast.
How are you today?
I'm all right. Not too bad. I survive. Greetings from cold, rainy, miserable Dublin, but it's not so bad.
Is it really cold up there already?
I mean, here it's like sideways wind chill. So
okay.
It feels colder than places that are colder, but it is what it is.
It's uncharacteristically warm here in the southern United States in Virginia.
Okay, I see. All right.
So anyway, let's talk about how it ends. 10th record. I guess we could start right there. First of all, I love the record. And I was wondering, when you were writing it, do you ever have any difficulty not writing the previous Primordial record? Does that make sense? Do you have any trouble not revisiting the older stuff?
Yes, and sometimes you do. I mean, at least now at this stage in our career for Primordial, I mean, I feel that we sort of have carved our own niche quite particularly, that no one really sounds like us and we don't really sound like anybody. So sometimes you might play a riff and think to yourself, I think this sounds like The Fires from the debut album. And there's a part of you that feels, well, you know what? I think at this stage of the game, 30 odd years in, if there's something, a kind of vague echo of what has been before, then that's okay if you've sort of forged your own style. So, I mean, the Primordial style is quite particular. We don't have an uncomfortable electronic period, or we never really strayed too far from the path that we were moving along. So this new album is a bit more epic heavy metal than the last one. The previous one was a bit, I think, darker, a bit more gloomy, introspective. This one's a bit more angry, a bit more epic metal, maybe. So the answer is we try not to think about really much, in the sense that you don't second guess yourself. You just try and follow what feels the right thing to do instinctually. And if it sounds like Primordial, it sounds like Primordial. And if it sounds like a riff that's been before, I mean, look, if it's a good riff, it's a good riff, I guess,
Makes sense. You ever imagine, you said you've been doing this 30 years, ever imagine you'd still be at this 30 years later?
No, not really. I knew I would be still sitting here wearing a fucking Carnivore shirt some 30 odd years after the first time I heard Carnivore. Like, I knew I was a heavy metal for life. The moment I heard Prowler by Maiden somewhere in the mid-80s, when the needle hit the groove and that opening riff, I was like, okay, that's me to the grave. And I mean, here, that's still the same 40 or whatever it is, 35. How many years is it since I heard that? 80. Yeah, okay, 40 years, I guess. So that's not changed. As for a band, well, most bands never make it past the first 2 or 3 gigs. So I knew once we made the demo that we would make an album. And then once we made the second album and started to play some gigs in Europe, I knew, okay, so there's a bit more legs in this than I thought. And then all of a sudden, a decade goes by, and then 2 decades, and well, here you are. You're an entirely different set of atoms you were 30 years ago. But it feels like it was only a blink of an eye ago, but it also feels like a complete other. Well, it was another century, right? So it kind of feels like both things simultaneously.
It's funny. That's good. And it's funny you mentioned, like, you have that that one moment with Prowler. For me, it was Diary of a Madman. Back in high
Ooh,
school, I remember,
yeah, yeah.
walking into the store knowing nothing about Ozzy and seeing that record on the shelf. I'm like, what the hell? And that
What is?
first, the drums, I'm done.
Oh, oh yeah.
Wholeheartedly forever.
And that song itself, goddamn, what a song that is. Oof.
Yeah.
That's a good record to like how shall we say, to launch your ship, to
Yeah, and from then on, it's
with.
been, and even that record is still, I listen to it almost daily. That record holds up. It's just
Yeah, yeah,
insane.
yeah, yeah. It's a Stone Cold classic. Yeah, absolutely.
So getting back to how it ends, then, I know it was written before the current world situation, but it's super timely. Oh, really? I mean, it's super timely, right? I mean, I listened to it again, setting
Yeah,
up for this. I'm like, wow, it was almost like he saw the writing on the wall. And I listened to your Agitators
yeah,
Anonymous too, so I know you sort of did,
yeah.
but this is really timely.
Well, I mean, if you want to separate me from the band for a moment, then the way I've sort of been looking at the world for 20, 25, 30 years, the way things unfolded in the last five are quite, they fold quite neatly into some elements of my worldview. So it was relatively prescient. One could say that I went as soon as how we say the lockdown was announced, I started Agitators Anonymous and basically said, like, look, this is going to go on for years. Mark my words. And I would say most of the things that I talked about, an awful lot of them are incoming or are, let's say, in the post for us. But I would still stand by most of the things that I said, if not all of them. Of course, they're set to the backdrop of a very difficult situation, which we all went through, which was, you're literally locked in your home. I live in the middle of a big city on my own, so you're literally imprisoned in the center of Dublin, which was turning into a madhouse. So there's all those things to consider, but certainly with the Primordial album, I didn't want it to be like a lockdown record. But what I did want to do was to use elements of what happened to maybe inform the idea that how it ends is deliberately titled so to make it cryptic, but it's also to consider our relationship to liberty, which I think is the most important word in any language, our relationship to liberty, but not make it a modern record to look back at, let's say, romantic figures from 100, 120, 130 years ago in different cultures that inspired our relationship to want intellectual, physical, bodily autonomy from institutions of authority and state, and the desire and will towards those processes. And that was sort of what inspired me. I didn't want to make it's very simplistic way to say, this is a modern kind of record. So I took some elements of, let's say this, if To the Nameless Dead is an album about the movement of border and empire, a nation and state, this is about the people within those boundaries who rebelled and resisted against the machinations of authority. So it's a kind of like a rebel record, like an outlaw record, almost like a protest record, like a resistance record, and that has echoes of what just happened to us as a society, and also it goes back 100, 120, 130 years to, let's say, the beginning of the 19th century and the lead up to the First World War. And but it's also personal. It's also for people. There's very simple tropes as well in it. Sometimes you have to wrap up a complicated process in a very simple phrasings. So it's kind of for anybody who felt senses of injustice or kind of felt that they didn't have an angry voice speaking through musical terms, because musicians really their job should be to try and on some level hold speak truth to power. And I saw an awful lot of the metal scene conforming.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because, like, historically, right, the 60s did it, the 70s did it. There's always been that sort of, I guess, to quote you, truth to power, right? Or some kind of trying to mirror up to society and say, here's where you're fucking up.
Yeah, musicians used to rebel against the state narrative and corrupt politicians. And I saw in the metal scene an awful lot of people seem, at least for me, conforming to the narrative handed down to them by, as always, corrupt politicians hand in hand with a media narrative. And I just thought, well, this is not for me. My own small microcosm of a way, brought me some heat, some enemies, some people pissed off at me.
Sure.
But I stuck to it, and same thing as I always did through all the interviews and all the old press, and went, well, look, for me, skepticism is the only rational perspective on any position, regardless of what it is. And too many people were, propagandaized. And if you were able to try and step outside of your emotional stasis in relation to these things, be objective, I think we were played. And so I think it should be the job of artists to at least try and speak to that. But an awful lot of people were in lockstep with the narrative, and that's it disappointed me.
Yeah, but to be fair, though, and you might disagree with me totally, and this has nothing to do with Primordial, so we'll stop talking about this shortly. But do you feel like? I feel like some of those people are. That's all the news they've gotten, right? That's all that's what you're being fed, that narrative, right? At least here in the States. So for me, I go outside and listen to like BBC News, or I listen to Australian news, sometimes even Al Jazeera, because you're getting news that's not filtered through Democrat, Republican, or any of that stuff. Does that make sense?
Of course. Our partisanship was channeled by the powers that be in a very simple divide and conquer ideal, which of course meant that you ramp people against each other rather than have dissent against the system that that sort of creates that situation. I think, and of course, an awful lot of people are just human emotions to be scared of what's happening. But I think we were played, and I think that our fears were, weaponized against us. That's my feeling. And maybe I just had the space and the time and the mental fortitude, maybe it's not the right word, I don't know, maybe it's because I looked at the way I looked at the world anyway, to try and at least step sideways to look at it from a few different points of view. Some I failed with, some I didn't, but out of it came, as we go back to Primordial, this angry resistance record called How It Ends, and it felt like somehow maybe, not to sound like arrogant, but maybe the metal scene needed a little bit of fuck you back into in this element, into the tone, not fantastical stuff, but like a real genuine, like angry protest.
I'm just looking at the songs and listening to what I was listening to today. Pilgrimage to the World's End is so amazing and so right on.
Well, Pilgrimage to the World End is it's a song about poor people being forced to leave their lands by institutions of power, and we still see poor people in boats.
How much more timely can that be?
Yeah, and we still see poor people being forced into boats too. So I'm not going to say it's too easy to say it's a pro-migrant song, but it's about the migrancy of people throughout the centuries and thousands of years. But it originated about Irish people being sent to the Australasias and stuff, and as convicts. And then they're it's a little bit got echoes of, in We Shall Not Serve, about sort of resistance to colony, resistance to empire. So it's it's choosing the downtrodden, the kind of Johnny Cash way of looking at things, So the whole album is kind of about that. I'm not so sure it's to go as far as to call it like a working class record, but it's got echoes of sort of resistance to this institutional authority that's enforced upon poor people or
worldwide.
Yeah, sure. Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, one of the songs partly inspired by the revolution in Haiti, and I've got very interested in reading about that. But really, the themes about resistance, alienation, martyrdom, they should speak to you if you're from, Peru or, or, maybe you're from fucking East Timor, or I don't know, or Nepal, or whatever it is, and Ireland and Australia and whatever. So but there's also, the album is also cloaked in a kind of, there's a veil of romance also to it. and the album admits that, and it looks like figures that like Joseph Plunkett, an Irish poet, nationalist who was shot by the English after the Rising, and as part of one of his poems in one of the songs. And there's a very famous song about him called Grace, about the woman he married the night before he was shot. And so there's an element of poetic, romantic nationalism to some of it, but not nationalistic as in either side of the modern political divide, how you could describe it to. So it's set to a historical backdrop that people should be able to find some romance and humanity in. At least that's how I see it.
I'm loving it. I mean, the first 4 tracks of this thing really take you on a journey, and they're long too, right? They're like 8 minutes long each.
Yeah, always, yeah. You know,
so you may or may not want to answer this. You may or may not want to answer this one. I was doing some research on here, and some of the scuttlebutt and buzz is this may be the last Primordial record, and that's what that's hitting at. Is that something I never thought of that?
No, not really. I did it on purpose.
Okay.
Just to be kind of cryptic. The cover is, and it's from the cover of an Irish farming magazine.
You got the pistol, yeah.
Yeah, but originally that was a sheath of wheat.
Oh.
And it said forward into the future, and it was about agriculture and farming. And I was looking about the cover, and I thought that's a brilliant image, right? Because I love propaganda posters from the 20s and 30s, and I wanted it to be Irish, not like Russian or something. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, we could take that and let's put a little pistol in his hand. And then it's really saying, is this how every movement for freedom and liberty ends? And also cryptically is me suggesting it's the end of the band. It's not, but who knows?
Yeah, it's worked, because everything I read today or yesterday when I was looking, everybody's suggesting that. I never thought about it, but
yeah, neither did we. The rest of the band were like, that's a bit much. And I was like, no, it's going to get people talking, but also it's not really about the end of the band. But you never know when the end is coming. It's in the post, right?
Well, you never know when the end is coming anywhere, right?
There you go.
Not just Primordial.
Yeah, you could be the last person I ever speak to. Who knows?
Right. What's the plan to take this on the road? Any plans at all?
Yeah, well, we just did a 3-week tour with Paradise Lost in Europe, which was brilliant, great, big crowds. We have individual gigs, a lot of festivals in Europe, but for the first time around Maryland Death Fest, we're going to play about a week of gigs in America.
Oh, I can't wait. I didn't know you were playing it. That's like an hour from me, and I go often, so yeah, I'll be there for sure.
Oh, awesome.
I've actually never seen you guys.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, yeah, Sunday, we're on Sunday at MDF, and then I think we're going to play Saturday somewhere else, and then we've got a week of gigs after that, as I understand, with Bloodbath. So,
oh, nice. No 70K?
The problem with 70K is, and every year we talk to them, it's like it's a week out of working men's lives,
right?
Which justifying to wives and families.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Is difficult. Kind of like, here you go, stay in Ireland where it's miserable and rainy while I swan around.
Go hang in the Bahamas, right? No, I get that.
I've been there like 3 times, and it was cool. But the problem is, if we take that week off, it's a week off some other more practical things in parentheses. We can't do something else. I'd like to go, but maybe a karaoke version would be good.
Oh yeah. So that's going to bring me to the end of what I had.